Alright my friends, how you all doing? Welcome back to the channel and welcome to some fresh Planet Zoo content, my friends. We're not going to be doing any of the big series today. We're going to jump in and we're going to do a how-to episode. You guys have been asking for lots of these recently. I did post in the Discord as well, probably, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks ago, asking for some more suggestions on things you'd like to see me do some tutorials and some hints and tips on, and we're going to jump into a big one today actually, and we're going to be talking about realistic habitats basically. Now this is going to be sort of like a beginner's guide from my opinion on how to do it. We'll see how this one does. If it does well and you guys would like to see more of this and maybe more of an advanced thing where I do a bit more building, then we can always do that at a later date, my friends. I have plenty of these planned. There's lots of them coming up, so do keep your eyes peeled to the channel if this is something that you're interested in. But without further ado, my friends, let's jump in to this how-to episode. Okay, my friends, so we are going to be using the flamingo habitat in Tropical Wings as an example for everything I'm going to talk about in today's episode. So basically what we're going to be talking about is how to build realistic habitats. Now, it probably on paper looks and sounds easier than it probably is. I know this is something that lots of people want to do. It's something that lots of people want to be able to achieve with the game. There is certain things that the game will not allow you to do. I am one of those people that likes to try to push this game to its limits, and lots of people that watch the channel regularly know this, and it's a lot of the reason why many of my zoos in the long run end up breaking, in my opinion. Now this is a pretty simple habitat that we're going to be using for this tutorial. I think if we were to ever do like an advanced version of the realistic builds, then I would maybe use something over in Jammy, because there's more been built over there, and we can look at stuff like that. And also parts of what I'm going to talk about today, I am going to be doing episodes on those on their own. So don't worry if you feel like there's some stuff I don't go really in depth in. We are going to be doing it at a later date, but I feel like the need to kind of separate them, and they deserve to have their own episode. Just before we really get started as well is if the audio sounds a little strange at the moment, I'll apologize for it. For the people that have seen the update video, you know that this room has been turned into like an office now, and unfortunately it's a very big room and it's literally just a computer in it at the moment, and so there's nowhere for the sound to go, and it's a little echoey, so I do apologize for that. It's something that in the long run I am going to tackle, but I've just not got round to doing it now. But anyway, let's get into this episode. So as you can see on the screen, my friends, this is the flamingo habitat in Tropical Wings Zoo, which is a big series of mine that I've been doing on the channel. It is coming back soon, and we've had a bit of a break, about a month's break recently from the series. I'll link the playlist above. If you are new to the channel and you've not seen it, feel free to go and watch the series. But this is our flamingo habitat, and I have one of my big things on the channel is that I love to tackle realistic builds and try to go for the realism aspect, rather than just building what I want basically, or doing heavily themed things. And I'm going to talk you through my process on how to build realistic habitats. Now this is just my way of doing things. It's not the be all and end all. It isn't the only way to do it. There's plenty of other creators in the community that are doing amazing realistic builds. Simply Savannah, you've got there's Sylv, there's obviously there's Rudy, there's the lady, there's loads of people. You've got Zwed as well, who is a big supporter of my channel, and I'm a big fan of his. I know that Zex, although he's not been building much recently, a lot of his builds really go towards that. So there's lots of people basically in the wider Planet Zoo community that you can check out their builds, and you'll probably be able to pick something up. But I just felt the need, really, because it's one of the most asked for things. I felt the need to make this video because I build only realism, really. I don't really step outside the realms of that, because I like to really see where I can take the game. So when I sit down and I start to begin to think about habitats and what I'm going to do, usually there's 5 things that I think about first, and I will slowly put them all up on the screen for you. So the first thing I always consider is animal choice. Might seem like an obvious one, but it is a little less obvious than you think to some people, because some will just start building a habitat and then throw an animal in at the last minute. But the reason I consider animal choice is because every animal is going to have its own wants and needs. Every animal is going to have its own space requirements. Like, for instance, a flamingo is going to require far less space than a polar bear, for instance, and especially if you are playing the game with all of the default settings. A polar bear on this game requires a enormous amount of space. I play some of with some of the settings ticked off because you can build more realistic habitats, and that's something to consider as well. If you really want to go for the deeper, realms of realism, I would heavily, look in the settings and tick sort of like habitat needs off and all that sort of stuff. It does mean that welfare, you won't have to be as stringent with things like toys and enrichment items and things like that, but if you go to a zoo, you don't really see a lot of that stuff on show anyway, so it actually helps feed you in to the realism anyway. So I would heavily look at the settings and ticking a few things off. I think the wellness one is a big one because it means that your habitat perimeters don't have to be as big as they usually are, but still, animal choice is a massive one. The second one that I always consider is location. Now, location's a big one because especially if you're building realistically. Now, it goes deeper than just realistically building the habitat. If you are going that way, you want your whole zoo and your whole project to look realistic. I spend a lot of time, as far as my zoos are concerned, on backstage areas, staff areas. I spend a lot of time on the actual animal husbandry areas, like their habitat buildings, like the access for zookeepers and so on and so on. And so you do need to think about your location heavily, big time. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through all 5 of these steps in a moment and how I considered them with the flamingo habitat. The next one is space. Now, this sort of feeds into animal choice, but I look at space slightly differently, because when you are thinking about space, you're not just thinking about the habitat itself. You're thinking about the space that's going to be required behind the habitat for your staff areas and the front, which is your guest facing. You need to think about space in a big way, because some animals are going to have a bigger pull than others. Like your more sort of A-star animals, your lions, your tigers, your elephants, that stuff that guests are really going to want to see. You're going to want to pack those guest areas out with plenty of viewing areas. You're going to leave big open spaces in your walkways, and so you do have to consider space, not just from an animal point of view, but from a guest and staff point of view as well. The next one feeds in quite nicely, and that is staff access and backlot areas. Now, if you're building realistically, it's one thing to get your habitat right, but in zoos, a lot of the staff access points are kept away from the guests for obvious reasons. We don't want our guests being able to get into the habitats through, say, a staff access door, and so on and so on. So you do have to think about this. And so not only do you have to think about the backlot area, which is your staff's ability to be able to make its way into the animal habitat and maybe to food preparing areas and that sort of stuff, your veterinary clinics, but you also need to think about their access points to getting into guest facing areas, especially if they're going to be going to do animal talks and so on and so on. You want to be able to make it as quick and as easy for your staff to get around your zoo and your habitats. And the last one that I always consider when I'm building a habitat is flow of traffic. And what I mean by this is the flow by which your guests are going to move. You kind of want to keep your guests moving along in one direction, or to a point where they can go one way or the other, but you want there to be you want to have the ability so that your guests can stop and look at an animal, but there still be enough space for other guests to walk past if they're not too bothered and they don't want to look at said animal. You need to be able to keep your guests moving, and you need to think about how you're going to move your guests around the zoo to and from each animal habitat. So if we jump in now and we do those 5 steps where this build is concerned, we can talk about how I considered everything. So the big one really is we take animal choice and location as sort of like a double where this is concerned, because what I did with this is that obviously when building a zoo, I tend to start with my entrance. I always start with my entrance. I like to get that in place because then I know what direction the zoo is going to move on my map. For people that have been watching the Tropical Ring series, you know that this is a huge build. I actually built the city, left a limited amount of space because I really wanted to challenge myself. So you build your entrance, and now location is very important here. You have to think about what animal do I want near the entrance of my zoo. Now, there's going to be stuff I'm going to talk about later on in today's video that actually feeds into what I'm going to talk about now. But flamingos are actually a very popular choice in a lot of zoos to put at the beginning of the zoo as sort of like a welcome sort of animal. Although their habitats do smell and whatnot, a lot of zoos do choose to do that, and I will get into that when I talk about other stuff in today's episode. So I decided to go with a flamingo because I know it is a popular choice. So then from my entrance, obviously I have to think about that flow of traffic. We've got to think about staff areas, and we need to think about space, because we've already done the first two choices. I'd made my animal choice in the flamingo. I knew the location was going to be near the entrance, near our entrance for the guests, and so I picked this spot here. Basically, that's the two parts that I've done there. Space then is something you have to consider, because you're thinking to yourself, how much space do the flamingos really require? Now, I've given my flamingos a fair bit of space because I want my flock of flamingos to really grow. I want there to be a lot of them. Eventually, I want them to really pack the habitat out. Now, the flamingos require more water than they do land area, but you still need both. And we will get into that. We'll talk more about that when I talk about the build part of actually building realistic habitats. So I knew they needed and required that. Then I had to think about staff access points. Now, when we were initially building this zoo, I'd built the entrance. I had this staff area placed, and I had this little part of the staff section built. So for me, an obvious choice was to face my animal house to the back, towards the staff area that I already built, and then obviously it was easy to stick an animal kitchen in here, because then it was all very close and compact, and it felt right to do so. I had to consider then staff traffic being able to get into the guest facing areas, which is why I then chose to put this path here. So I've already considered a lot of stuff there, the staff access in the backlot area. We knew we were going to put it towards the back of the habitat because it made sense to feed into here. But say you didn't have this here, then you just have to make the choice basically. You've got your entrance this side. Do you want your flow of traffic, which is the next thing we're going to consider, to go this way, or do you want your flow of traffic to just go up into the zoo? So really, you've got to use all 5 of those aspects to really get your habitat placed and in there perfectly. Now, this is, again, just the way I do it, but it might be interesting to use these 5 steps in future when you build a habitat and see how you get on. Just give it a go, see if it improves your ability to place an animal habitat, especially where guests, staff and everything is considered. And those are just the 5 steps that I consider whenever I build a habitat. So the next bit we're going to get into in today's video, my friends, is the design aspect of a realistic habitat basically. This is a difficult one because everybody's going to have their own way of doing it, but this is essentially what I do when it comes to designing a habitat, and I always design my habitat loosely before I will jump in and then build it, which is the last bit we'll talk about in today's video. So what I do is I do a lot of research, and I garner a lot of reference points basically. Now, as far as research is concerned, if you're building a realistic a realistic habitat, you really want to look into the more real elements of actual animal husbandry and keeping animals basically. The AZA have masses and masses of information on every animal that is kept in zoos and how zoos should keep them, and you can gather this stuff online. If you literally put that stuff in online, you'll be able to get sort of the leaflets and the information up on the animals. There's lots of it, and I believe even on my Discord, you can find the link to it in the description below. Someone posted it in one of the Planet Zoo sections on my Discord, so even feel free to go over there and see if you can find the link. It will definitely be there somewhere because somebody posted it. I haven't done it on the description box of this video. There's some other stuff that you will find I'm going to talk about, but you'll be able to find that. Literally go to Google and you'll be able to find it. But there's lots of information basically online about how each animal is kept, and I would suggest that essentially you just go and do some reading where the research is concerned. There's lots of books that you can get as well. Obviously, Eben of the Zwed channel, we talk about the architecture in zoos a fair amount, and he pointed me in the direction of some amazing books that I've actually purchased and been reading. Some of them are cheaper than others. It depends how seriously you want to take it, but for myself, because obviously obviously I make videos and I try to make a little bit of a living out of this sort of stuff. It's an investment that was well worth it, and it's very, very interesting what goes into the design process and the aspect of any animal habitat. And so reading and research is probably your first point of call, and you can do that loads and loads of different ways. The next thing that I've obviously said that I consider is reference. Now, what I mean by reference is garnering pictures and information that you can reference whilst building your habitat. Now, what you will see on your screen now is a wonderful website called ZooLex. Now, you go to www.zoolex.org, and on this website you can literally type in any animal, the zoos, anything that you can think of potentially, and it will bring up lots of examples of what you're looking for, basically. And then you can click on those pictures, and there you go, your reference points are there. Now, I'm showing you some reference points for flamingo habitats at the moment on the screen. And essentially that's what I did when I was starting to build mine. Now, where this is concerned, you can either use that to recreate that habitat, or you can use it to just be inspired by said habitats. A lot of the times I'm just inspired. I will take parts of loads of different builds and combine them and then see what happens. For instance, this flamingo habitat, the wall that we've got on the habitat and the way that it flows, ebbs and flows, is the same as the flamingo habitat from San Diego Zoo, I believe, in the States. I might be wrong, it might be another one in the States, but I know it's that you know, the other side of the pond, and I used that, and then I just basically created the sort of ground area myself, and it gave us this unique shape basically to the habitat that we've got. Another way that you can garner reference points is obviously just to go on Google Images, type in the animal, type in, you know, zoos, examples of, and you will find untold amount of pictures on there. I think where ZooLex kind of ups the doing this is that ZooLex will give you a lot of images that you won't necessarily find on just Google Images. The thing with ZooLex is because it's more of an in-depth look, you will get lots of examples of backlot areas, which is more like your staff, you know, staff access points and that. So then you do get more of a look at the stuff that you're really going to need to hone in on to really bring the realism to life. And the other thing that I tend to do as well, which is another reference that I do, is I'll go on Google Maps. I'll put a zoo in and then literally just look over the top, satellite images, and this is good for your backlot areas. This is good for seeing how staff areas flow into the main zoo, and it also will help your flow of traffic. You'll see on the screen at the moment, I'm just looking around London Zoo on Google Images, but you can see in points how you can move around. And with some zoos, not all zoos will do this, but with some zoos you can actually even take the little person and jump into the zoo and have a look around. You can't look at the backstage areas, unfortunately, using this, because I think zoos obviously want to keep this private for obvious reasons. But it is interesting that with some zoos you're going to jump on in and you can kind of walk around and get a real feel for you know, how the zoos are put together. So that's just the second bit. That's the design process, which I think you should always consider before jumping into the bit we're going to talk about now. And the next bit, my friends, is the build process. Now, I'm not actually going to build anything today. What I will say is that if you would like a future episode that's a bit more, maybe a bit more of an advanced episode where we potentially build a habitat together in stages, I will be happy to do that. So in the comment section below, just let me know if that's something you'd like to see, and I'd be happy to try and put something like that together. But the build process, essentially, I break this into stages, and I will give you the sort of the loose order that I do things in. And I say loose because every animal's a bit different. Some animals I have to really pay attention to certain things, and so I do it in a different order. But 9 times out of 10, this is the order that I will build in. So on the screen, I will show you how I go about it, and then we'll take a quick look at the flamingo habitat, and I'll explain how each one of these elements works. So the first one is I will mark the perimeter of the habitat, and I mark it because it's just a loose outline of where I intend to go with the build process. It will help me mark out sort of backstage areas. It lets me mark out where the guests are going to be, and then it lets me know a little bit about the space that the animals are going to have when I'm building it. Now I will show you what I do as far as marking the habitat in a moment, but that's the first stage I always abide by. The next one is that I build the animal housing units first. I always do this. Now the reason I do this is because then it helps me hone in on the direction that the habitat's actually going to be built into the guest facing areas. Now what I mean by this is, if we were to go back to the original sort of 5-step plan that I use, I obviously talk about staff access and backlot areas. Now if you build the animal point first, then you can hone in on your backlot areas a lot quicker. You will know exactly where your staff access points are, and then you can start thinking about where your staff paths and things like that are going to go. And I think it's just a really good thing to get done and get out of the way first as well. Some of these animal housing units are going to be far more detailed than others. Obviously we've got the flamingo one here, but what I'll do is when we jump back in, I'll show you the monkey and the ape unit, I should say, that we've got in this zoo, and you'll see it's far more detailed and far more thought through than the flamingo one had to be. The next thing I do is I build any water elements that are going to be involved in the habitat. And what I mean by this, it could be just standing water, it could be waterfalls, it could be rock features with water coming from them, but I always build this first. Some animals are going to require more water than others. Some are not going to require any at all. If you don't really want to, you could just put water dishes down, but 9 times out of 10 I always put water feature in a habitat. I just think it adds something really nice to them. Lots of zoos do this, and I feel like this is this is a really good thing to get done first. Now obviously if you're building realistically, 9 times out of 10 you're not just going to build up, you're not just going to dig a hole out and fill it with water, because zoos don't do that. Many zoos will build many of the water areas out of big concrete pools, or they will dig areas out and build more natural pools and that sort of stuff, but they go about it in a particular way. Again, this is something that if at a later date you'd like to see a tutorial on it, I will show you how I go about building the pools. And again as well, I should have said this about the animal housing units. I will be doing a tutorial on that because I've been asked by many people in the community to show them how I go about building animal housing units and stuff like that. There's going to be lots of tutorials basically coming up, and a lot of them are actually going to kind of splinter off from this one. And so yeah, I always put in my water first. Next up, I think about the terrain and the foliage. Now the reason I say terrain and foliage is because your terrain, again, every animal is going to have a different want and need for their terrain. Some you're going to want to build big banks and big hilly areas. Some you're going to want to build on a slant, and so they come down into it. There's a very interesting bear habitat that I was looking at recently when I was been looking at reference points. Basically, I'm thinking about doing a few one-off builds. And there was this very interesting bear habitat that I looked at, where the back of the habitat where the housing unit was so high up, and the viewing area for the guests was basically at the bottom of a hill, and that hill in the habitat, it comes all the way down, but it's so beautifully done because they've got this stream that runs all the way down into this small pond area at the bottom, and then there's all these rocks and there's trees and whatnot, but because it's all built on this banked hill, it just looks so natural. It looks like something out of Yellowstone National Park. It is a phenomenal habitat, and this is stuff you have to think about. So you've got to think about how you want your terrain to look, and also then you've got to think about your foliage. Again, every animal is going to have different foliage needs. I'm going to throw this out there right now, but I turn this off, the needs for certain foliage in habitats. And the reason I do this is because if you look at lots of zoos, they don't tend to go with every plant from the biome of that animal. At the end of the day, say you're building a zoo, for example, in the UK, we get 3 months of sunshine a year if we're lucky in this country. It's very cold a lot of the time, usually from around about October, late September, October, all the way through to sort of March, April time. It's not warm, and our winters are very, very cold. And so when zoos are thinking about that, they've got to think about plants that are going to be able to and deal with those cold snaps and deal with the weather in this country. And so there's certain palms and there's certain ferns and so on that are not going to do well in this country. There's certain plants that are just they're going to die out, and so zoos will concentrate more on local plants in the habitats. And so although it's nice to like fill a habitat out with all of these plants and stuff from the areas that the animals are from, if you're building realistically, you need to think another way. You need to think outside the box and think about doing it slightly differently, in my opinion. And then the last thing that I think about is guest and staff paths when I'm building my habitats. It's always the last thing that I put in, because I do this because if I've planned my habitat correctly, using the 5 steps that I've done at the beginning, the paths will put themselves in. Easy peasy. They will slowly find their way and they'll slowly flow around the edges of the habitat. So let's just jump in. Realise that this tutorial is going to be a bit of a long one, but it's a very sort of in-depth look at the way I build my realistic habitat. So if we jump in and we take a look at these 5 steps and how this habitat was built. So if we think about perimeter first, how did I go about marking the perimeter? So what I did is I actually didn't mark the perimeter in the shape that it's in, but what I did do is all I do to mark my perimeters, by the way, gang, is this. Okay, it's very simple. I will take a plaster piece and I will then put numerous plaster pieces where I intend to put my habitat, like so. And so you build kind of a shape, and then inside that shape is where your habitat is going to sit. The next step was to build the animal house. So what we did is we picked our spot. We knew we were going to build towards the back of the habitat along this line here, because our backstage area was back here already. So we already had a plan in place. We knew the backlot area was there, so we want that to back up into it. And so we knew our location for it, and then it is just a case of you've got your reference points, you've done your research, build away. You build your habitat, your habitat building, and this is essentially what I came up with when I was looking at a lot of flamingo reference points. It's just wooden buildings with staff areas to sort the food, bring it into the habitat, the ability to close doors, close animals off so that you can remove them from the habitat, move them to the vets, and so on and so on. And the way you do this is obviously you just make sure your staff access points and whatnot are all built in and they're all correct. And if you go around this way, we have a door at the back as well, because everything has to be thought through, especially when you're building realistically. You have to think about how your animals are going to go to and from said habitat. But what I am going to do, my friends, like I've already said, is we will do a tutorial video, sort of a how-to video, I should say, on this alone, animal housing. I did say I was going to show you the ape house, just so you could get sort of an example of one that's a bit more sort of tricky, and a lot more had to go into it. So essentially this is the ape house here, and it houses our gorillas, our chimpanzees, and our bonobos, and so this is sort of like an entrance point for our staff, and this is why it had to be thought through a lot more. Now this isn't finished, there's still lots and lots to go into this, but essentially this is how it's how you have to think about things differently. Obviously it's a lot more sort of dense cage areas that's had to go into this one. As you can see, you go around there, and that's a chimpanzee area. We have got doors that go to and from into other parts of the chimpanzees area, because they do have a separate section there. But if you was to go round this way, that takes you to the back of this, so it's another access point. And if you were to go through a different door, you would be able to find your way into the gorillas and the not bonobos, the mandrills, I should say. I don't know why I said bonobos, but yeah, this is the mandrills housing unit. Again, like I say, they're not finished, and then you go this way and this is the gorillas. But you have to think differently when you're building for different animals, and I'm just literally showing you that as an example, and like I've already said, I will be doing a tutorial video on this. Next stage is the water elements, ladies and gentlemen. So you've marked your perimeter, you've got your animal housing unit, then you've got to think about your water area. And so all I did is I wanted my water area to be at the front of the habitat. The reason I wanted to do this is because the flamingos spend a lot of time in there. We want our guests to see the flamingos, showing off natural natural behaviours and so on and so on. And so we've placed our water at the front of the habitat in this one. Next up, we think about the terrain and the foliage. We know our terrain doesn't have to be crazy, you know, hilly or anything like that where the flamingos are concerned. So we just put in this nice sort of like flat banked area off of the water, and then we've just stuck all of our plants sort of towards the edges. I do this a lot. It's nice to hide fences and things like that. One thing I will say is I went with a natural fence in this. A lot of zoos will go with fences that are like a go away green colour, or they may go with sort of like a fake rock that they build up just to make it look more natural. There's loads of different things, but that kind of comes back to that whole research and reference and finding what fits best for the build that you're going to go with. And then the last point is that of the staff access and the guest paths, and where this was concerned, because we'd planned it properly, we knew that our staff path was going to join in here, so we can join up to the backstage this way, we can join up to our guest area this way. And then as far as the guests were concerned, we've thought through our flow of traffic, we've got that all down, and we know where our guests are going to walk. So we know that we have to just follow the edge of this habitat, and that is going to be where our guests go. And then our workflow that we've put in place for the flow of traffic means that our guests will find a way out this way, they'll find a way out this way, and there's lots of room for our guests to move to and from the habitat. And that, my friends, is pretty much it for this how-to episode. And so there you have it, my friends. We are done and dusted for this how-to episode. I hope there's some tips in there that will help you potentially build a bit more realistically. Do let me know if you found any of it helpful in the comment section below. It's always nice to get some feedback from you guys. It's nice to hear what works, what hasn't worked for you. Also, my friends, be sure to let me know if there's any other stuff you'd like to get some hints and tips and tutorials and stuff on. I'm more than willing to do lots and lots of these. I really enjoy doing them because it's nice to kind of impart some knowledge on other people. Everybody's got their own way of doing things, and this is the way I do it. But if I can help one or two people maybe improve at the game or improve on their builds that they've got already, then I've succeeded basically in the task that I'm trying to do, and that's giving you some helpful hints and tips where Planet Zoo is concerned. Because let's be honest, it's not for the faint at heart, is it? It's not for the sort of casual gamer. It's a very, very difficult game to get to grips with. But you'll find all the links to all the stuff I've spoken about in today's video in the description box below, my friends. You'll also find the link to my socials, Twitter, Discord. Feel free to follow those. Become a big member of Discord. We always have a lot of fun over there, and the community is really thriving at the moment. If you are new to the channel, please consider hitting that subscribe button. It's very much appreciated by me, and the more likes I get on the video, the more I know you're enjoying it. So be sure to like the video if you have done so, my friends. But I am done and dusted. I am off ski. I will see you on the next one, my friends, but until then, stay safe, stay humble. See you later.